This podcast is sponsored by Two Fat Lardies. Check them out at www.twofatlardies.co.uk and play the period, not the rule. This vidcast is sponsored by Coat Harms Paints, the number one source for all your model painting needs. Check out their website for more details. Hello, welcome to another episode of the Meeples and Miniatures Miniature Review Show with me, your host, Neil Shuck. On today's show, we're looking at a box set of mounted sergeants from Fireforge Games. This is the third in their mounted knights range, following on from the Teutonic Knights and the Templar Knights, and gives you the option to field slightly less well-armoured mounted troops amongst your heavily armoured knights. Another really evocative piece of artwork. This one very much of the kind of, the joys of campaigning, I suppose. Interestingly, the one thing I note here is that you look at this piece of box art, you notice that you've got two horses that have that are wearing barding. Barded horses are not actually available in this box set, so slight misnomer with the box art there, but very evocative all the same. Again, we look at the back of the box, same layout to what we've seen before, a little bit of history behind the unit, a picture of what the unit can look like, and then obviously also in the range we've got the Teutonic Knights and the Templar Knights. So again, let's have a look at what we've got in the box. First thing to note that we're now looking at what is a familiar sprue. There are two of these in the box. You have 4 knight bodies, 4 capes, the same 9 weapon options: 2 swords, morning star, mace, axe, 4 lances, plus 6 shields. Obviously, the thing to note, if you've seen the other 2 reviews of Fireforge Games, these are heater shields, which are a fair bit smaller than the shields that come with the other knights. And then obviously, if you look onto the right hand side, you'll see a completely different set of 10 heads. Okay, so all the headgear much different to the helms you get in the other knight box sets. Also of note, actually, if you look at this particular sprue, is that the shields on the last 2 sets you had arms with shields moulded on. What we've got here is that all the shield arms are completely separate, but you have 3 shields that are blank, and then 3 shields where there's a little locating square on the shield, and the arm that they connect to is actually blank with a location hole. So that's a slight difference from what's gone before, where those shield arms have been put together with the shields arms moulded onto the shields. I think it's probably to do actually with the shield size more than anything else, because as I say, these shields are quite small. So you get 2 of these sprues, and then you get, as I said before, the command sprue. And I think you'll notice the difference here. Normally the command sprues are just the same sprue, but the heads are replaced by this section on the left hand side, where you've got 4 different flags, plus a banner pole top with a cross and a horn. However, if you flick to the right, you'll see the shields are different to what is available on the previous sprue. So I actually think that this, if I'm looking at it, is the same command sprue as what comes in the Teutonic Knights box set. So they've kind of doubled up on sprue use here and put the command sprue from the Teutonic Knights in with this particular set. It doesn't make too much of a difference. It just means that whereas several of your miniatures will have, the smaller heater shields. You have these bigger shields here on these. However, having said all that, there are enough shields and separate shield arms on the other sprues, which means that you don't have to use these larger shields if you don't want to. There are enough shields to equip your 12 knights from the other 2 sprues. Moving on to the horses, and you actually get 4 of this unarmoured horse sprue, which is the same sprue as we saw in the Templar Knights. So you can immediately see now that Fireforge are starting to reuse different sprues in their various kits. Which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It just means that they can produce various different kits now with a slightly reduced cost, because they produce the horses. There's no need to resculpt them because they're already there. As I say, this particular sprue, with all the pieces on it, actually gives you a potential of 81 different variants of horse just from this sprue. So, they really have no need to create any further sprues. They can just start reusing what they've got and just resculpting exactly what they need to. So again, what I've done is I've taken one sprue and put together a selection of poses that you can come up with of this particular sprue with different sets of headgear. I suppose it is of immediate note that these, whilst the game being very dynamic, do have a slightly different look to the Templar Knights and the Teutonic Knights that come before them. But they're kind of still in keeping, sort of thing. And again, I've moulded these with the capes on the bodies. You don't have to mould them with the capes. But my answer is, well, why wouldn't you? Because they give a lovely dynamic look to the model. So we'll take a closer look around these minis, just to give you some idea of what they're like putting them together. So it has to be said, looking at this figure, which has a very kind of upright pose, of everything, this particular body can be a little awkward, because I say the actual pose is kind of leaning back slightly, so it does make the pose look very stiff and upright. However, I suppose, especially with, what I've done here, I've just put an upright lance on the miniature, but that could also be used as a standard bearer, for example. But hopefully this shot gives the definition of the chainmail. It should be picked up in painting really well. So despite, a lot of people complain about potentially the lack of definition with plastic moulding, that when it comes to doing things like chainmail and what have you, it could potentially be slightly problematic. I think you can see from these pictures that wouldn't be the case. Also worthy of note is, as we've seen before, putting the horses together, you'll need to have a little bit of care when gluing the heads to the bodies, and there is a distinct mould line that will need to be covered. Looking at this other pose, the only thing I'd say here really is, the one thing I found is that although we've got complete multi-pose options available, some heads fit better with some bodies. This head looks very kind of upright and almost kind of leant back. Wasn't overly happy in the end with the use of this. I don't know whether it's simply a case of the way I've got it posed, especially with the way the cape is, and it would look better if the cape wasn't on, because potentially the way the cape fits around the shoulders can potentially force the head up and back a bit. Something to be aware of, and you might want to have a play around when fitting the heads onto the shoulders. I didn't do that much, because obviously I'm just putting these together straight off the sprue for review. It's worth to note that there's a slight mould line around the helmet, so a bit more cleaning up required on this particular pose. Comes to is actually one of my favourite heads from this sprue, which is just a plain male head. There's only one of these. It's actually my favourite, and gives probably one of my favourite poses. Really dynamic, charging with a lance pose. One thing again I like it, because these are helmets as opposed to helms, they've had to look at sculpting a lot more facial definition, and they've done that really, really well. When you can get dynamic poses like this, a determined looking charging knight, then I think they're worth it. And the horses poses look really dynamic and real. And yet again, notes of got to make sure you do some cleaning up before you actually paint this, do some filling in, etc. It's a fantastic dynamic looking pose. Finally, this one perhaps slightly more problematic. I had to play around a little bit with how I fitted the shield arm on this particular pose, but I love the horse. I love the horse pose. Apologies a little bit about the clarity of this picture. Just shows off a wonderfully dynamic pose for the horse. So again, the same amount of choice and variation is available with these knights as with the others. So you got just over 8,500 different permutations, a way of putting the knights together. Slightly fewer because you only got the one type of horse sprue, but still, just under 700,000 permutations that you can use for putting these knights together. So lots and lots of variation and individuality you can put into these figures. There is no excuse to ever have the same figure twice in your standard Wargames army. Price wise, these again are priced at £20, so just over £1.60 per figure, which is absolutely superb. I think safe for mounted figures, and they are available either direct from Fireforge Games or from most of your local hobby retailers. Particularly in the UK, you can easily get hold of them from North Star, for example. I think coupled with the Templar Knights and the Teutonic Knights, this makes for a fantastic addition to Fireforge's medieval Knights box sets. And as I said, the thing I really love about them, other than the sheer versatility of the kits, is the fact that they just have this lovely dynamic feel. The way the horses are posed and everything, they just give this fantastic, at full charge sort of pose to knights, which is the sort of thing that you really want them to look like, when they're on the war games table. You don't really want the horses at rest with knights on. You want to see them charging across the table. As you look at these models, you see, that is particularly well captured. And once again, I just can't recommend these highly enough. I think they're a fabulous set of models. And whilst they suffer some of the same drawbacks as with the other Fireforge models, as in, you've got to be patient with the lances, because when sticking the lance arms together, you've got to make sure that you've got a really good bond before you let go, otherwise the weight of the weapon can potentially move the arm. And also, you've got to be a little bit careful when it comes to poses, as opposed to what arms fit with what bodies, especially if you're using capes. It's not so much of a problem if you're not using capes, but especially if you're using capes, you've got to be a little bit more careful and potentially do a dry run over, especially what shield arms work well with what body. I say not so much of an issue if you're not using the capes. Obviously, bits of cleaning up to do on the kits, but nothing that we haven't seen before with plastic horses, to be honest. The detail and the definition on these, I say especially with the faces, where because they're not wearing helms, you do have to get them right. And I think these do. So that's the Mounted Sergeants from Fireforge Games. I highly recommend these. Well, that's all I've got time for on this show. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you very much for watching. And as always, take care, happy gaming, and I'll see you very soon. This vidcast is sponsored by Caliber Books. More stuff for wargamers than anyone else on the planet. Check out their website for more details. This vidcast is sponsored by Wargame Soldiers and Strategy magazine. Check out their website at www.wssmagazine.com.